For the first time since Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were kidnapped and killed in January 2007, we finally not only heard what happened to them, but we saw it. It was graphic and intense. The families cried. Shannon's best friend left the courtroom at one point. Letalvis Cobbins covered his face, rocked a little bit. Shannon's father kept his eyes on Letalvis Cobbins the entire time. In the courtroom today for Letalvis Cobbins' trial in what was expected to be the state's last witness, our Knox County's chief medical examiner, Dr. Darinka Malusnik-Polchin, showed photographs of the injuries that Shannon and Chris suffered. She also described their deaths and what happened to them leading up to death.
It entered again at an angle, and it goes from right to left and downward. That particular bullet entered the brain and damaged the right side of the right hemisphere of the brain, and then severed the brainstem. That's the injury, that was the deadly injury. That's the injury that killed Mr. Newsom.
His hands were tied behind his back. His ankles were bound with a belt. There was a sock, probably his own socks, stuffed in his mouth, and then a shoestring, his own shoestrings, tied around that sock to keep it in his mouth. He was blindfolded, and then a shirt placed over his head. He was either carried or more likely led out to some railroad tracks near the Chipman Street house where they were held captive in January 2007. He was shot 3 times. He was on his back and dead when his body was set on fire. The judge took a break after that very intense testimony. When we came back, we learned what happened to Shannon. She died with her eyes open, and that was a very chilling photograph that jurors saw.
It shows how cyanotic, almost kind of purple-blue her face is because of the asphyxia, lack of oxygen, relatively slow death. The impression here is, again, from being pressed against the garbage can, side of the garbage can. And also there are some pressure marks on her nose. Her eyes remained open, and that's why you can see some darkening, which is a drying artifact in the eyes.
Her injuries came over several hours, as much as 12 to even 24 hours. The medical examiner could not pinpoint an exact time of death, but she could say that Shannon was, for instance, raped fairly early on, and then hours may have passed and she was raped again. There were injuries showing that not only was she the victim of what the medical examiner termed a simple rape, her lower body was actually subjected to blunt force trauma.
The photograph was taken as is when the body arrived to the office and without any cleaning, prior cleaning. So this is just to show where the blood is coming from. This is the blood that is coming from the injury to the anogenital region. There is bruising around the anus, there is bruising around the vagina, but most importantly, there's extensive bruising, it's not actually almost, but it's hematoma formation in the skin around that anogenital region, meaning hematoma is accumulation of blood. I can basically scoop it out like a blood clot from the tissue. So it's not just bleeding into the tissue, it's a blood clot that created a pocket in the tissue, and I'm seeing it on both sides. So we're looking at the right buttock here, left buttock here, and I'm looking at the right and left so-called perineum with bruising and lots of abrasions. So as you can tell, the skin is already breaking down, so this is not just your usual intercourse or rape. This is much more than that.
What causes a hematoma?
It's a blunt trauma. So what I'm looking here is not just a simple rape. If I see a simple rape, it's going to be some injury in the vaginal introitus, vagina, maybe rectum. What I'm seeing here is just true blunt trauma, beating, that's heavy object coming in contact with the body.
which means that she was kicked in her vaginal region, she may have been punched in her vaginal region, and it would have been an attack that spanned a good amount of time. A white plastic grocery bag you might get at Kroger was placed over her head. She was stuffed inside this trash can. Medical examiner said she would have suffocated within an hour. Surprisingly, the jurors did not show much reaction to any of this. A male juror flinched and covered his face at the photograph of Chris Newsom's anal injuries, but recovered fairly quickly. A female juror gasped and covered her mouth when we saw the first photograph of Shannon's body outside the trash can when she was still hogtied, but again, quickly recovered. We've seen no other reaction from them.